The sky over Kesserik was always burning. The planet's fractured moon spun too close to the surface, showering molten dust across the atmosphere in red-orange waves that never ceased. Down below, in the waste-strewn wastelands beneath the mining ridges, nothing lived that wasn't desperate. And no one wandered that deep unless they had a death wish or a reason. Darren Hol had a reason. His repair shuttle was barely holding altitude. Half the hull was stripped raw by a collision with stray debris. His sensors were fried, and the only thing between him and a black hole grave was an old impulse stabilizer he'd bolted to the power core like a crutch. When the shuttle groaned a final protest, Darren swore under his breath and slammed it into the only semi-flat plateau the moonscape offered. Smoke hissed from under the cockpit. Lights flickered, then died. "Lovely," he muttered, slamming his toolkit shut and stepping onto the cratered dust. The wind immediately bit at his exposed arms, dry, crackling, too thin to breathe for long. He flipped down his rebreather, checked his readings, and began scanning the terrain for salvage. That was when he heard it. Not a machine, not static, a sound deeper than metal and older than instinct. Breathing. Heavy, labored, almost choking. Darren turned, narrowing his eyes through the dusty red light. The ridge above him had cracked open from a recent impact. Fresh slag and debris covered the ground. Something massive had fallen there. But the life signature his HUD picked up wasn't faint enough to be a dying scavenger. It was stronger. He followed the sound, step by careful step, until he reached the edge of the impact zone. What he saw froze him in place. A dragon. At least that's what his mind called it. But this was no fantasy beast. It was real, alive, scarred, an apex predator built for war. Its scales shimmered like blackened alloy, fractured and crusted with dried blood. A wing was torn, twisted beneath its bulk, and its breathing came through gritted fangs, each one longer than his arm. One eye was swollen shut. Its chest rose in shuddering gasps, but even broken and bleeding, it was magnificent and terrifying, its remaining eye fixed on him, silver and slitted like a molten star. And Darren knew if it could move, it would have ended him right there. But it didn't. It watched, not like a predator, like it had already been hunted. Darren dropped to his knee, ignoring the warnings blinking across his suit about radiation exposure. He didn't move any closer. He just stared back. "You're not from around here," he said, voice flat, controlled. The dragon bared its fangs, barely managing a growl that sounded more like a death rattle. "Yeah, me neither." He set the toolkit down and pulled out the smallest scanner he had. No sudden moves. He crouched low and let it run a full sweep from 10 meters away. His suspicions confirmed what his gut already knew. This thing wasn't just a creature. It was engineered, organometallic bone structure, reinforced tissue with thermal converters, combat-grade enhancements woven into the very strands of its DNA. Whatever it was, it hadn't evolved. It had been built, and someone had left it here to die. "Son of a," Darren muttered. "They made you a weapon." He looked back into that eye. The beast blinked slowly, exhaling steam. It understood. Maybe not the words, but the tone, the truth. Darren should have walked away. He had limited oxygen, a dying shuttle, and no backup. Helping a bleeding war beast wasn't just irrational, it was suicidal. But he didn't move. Instead, he opened the case and got to work. He started with the exposed wounds, sealing the worst of them with regenerative foam, stitching what he could with thermal thread. He had no sedatives, but the dragon didn't thrash. It simply growled, low and steady, a sound like thunder too tired to roar. Darren reinforced the twisted wing with scrap tubing and sensor cable, using a Starship fuel line clamp to brace a joint. He rerouted power from his rebreather to keep the heat stabilizer pressed to its chest, slowing the internal hemorrhaging just long enough to let the organ weave begin repairing. Hours passed. When he finally collapsed beside the beast, dizzy and sweating, the wind had died. The sky above flickered with the red light of Kesserik's shattered moon. He looked up at it, then at the dragon. "You better not die," he muttered. "Because I'm too tired to explain this to the next thing that tries to eat me." The dragon blinked once, then, impossibly, it closed its eye and breathed. Darren's shuttle was a tomb by morning. The power core had overloaded during the night, frying the last of his comms and detonating his only long-range transmitter, but the dragon was still alive, and that was something. He spent the next 2 days hauling water packs from a nearby crash site and feeding the beast electrolyte gel meant for synthetic graft tissue. It hated the taste, judging by the snarls, but it drank anyway. He ran diagnostics, patched scale tears, and slowly cleaned away the dried blood. Beneath the grime and wounds, the beast's true form emerged, sleek and brutal, with overlapping black and gold plating that shimmered faintly under starlight. Its wings, even mangled, spanned the length of a short-range cruiser. By the third night, it tried to stand. It failed, collapsing in a heap. But it tried. Darren stood at its side, hand resting lightly against its flank. The heat from its body pulsed in waves, too hot for anything else to touch without burning. Yet his skin never blistered. The dragon seemed to hold the fire back. "You're stubborn," he muttered. "I respect that." The beast grunted. He chuckled. "You're going to need a name, you know. Can't just keep calling you, hey." The dragon turned its head, one eye narrowing. Its stare was hard to meet. Not because of threat, but because of weight. There was memory there. Maybe pain. Maybe worse. Darren tilted his head, thinking. Then he smiled. "Varos," he said. The dragon's eye gleamed. "It means ember, the kind that refuses to die. My father used to tell me stories." Varos growled once, not in warning. It was softer, almost approving. From that night forward, Darren worked not just to heal but to rebuild. He scavenged power cells, converted an old grav sled into a makeshift harness, and repurposed stabilizers to support the dragon's frame. Every day Varos grew stronger, the wounds closed, the wings stiffened, and the fire beneath his skin began to burn again. But it wasn't just the body, it was the bond. He no longer watched Darren with caution. He followed him. When Darren stood, Varos stood. When Darren moved, Varos moved, silent, constant, a shadow made of scale and strength, not leashed, not bound, chosen. By the end of the month, Darren had no working ship, no comms, no escape. But he had a dragon. And for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. He had no idea what was waiting beyond the wrecked stars of Kesserik. But he knew this, if it came for him, it would have to go through Varos first. The day Varos flew again began with thunder. Not from the sky, Kesserik's skies hadn't heard thunder in years, but from the ridgeline, where the last of Darren's salvage charges detonated and split the flank of a wrecked orbital cruiser in two. The explosion echoed across the barren basin, scattering shards of obsidian-like debris, revealing a once-buried fusion cell that could, if coaxed, power a small city or jumpstart a heavy lifter engine, or, as Darren had in mind, power a pair of artificial flight actuators strong enough to stabilize a dragon's half-healed wing. Darren stood amidst the fumes, sweat and dust smeared across his brow, goggles fogged with soot, wrench in one hand and a detonation panel in the other. He coughed, not out of fear but out of habit. The blast had gone smoother than expected, for once. Behind him, Varos watched silently from the edge of the crater, massive wings tucked against his plated sides, tail wrapped around the jagged remains of a landing strut. The wind stirred his scales, revealing faint blue heat pulsing beneath the dark gold lines. "If this works," Darren said, prying open the fusion cell's hardened casing, "we might actually have a shot at getting off this rock." Varos rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that had become familiar, agreement. It took 3 days to rig the actuators, another 2 to align them with Varos's wing structure. The dragon endured Darren's tinkering with patience that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. When the final connection was made, and the magnetic anchors fixed to the damaged primary wing struts, Darren stepped back. "I've done what I can," he said. "The rest is up to you." Varos unfurled his wings slowly. The artificial actuators hummed to life, sending ripples of blue energy along the damaged membrane. The dragon tensed, muscles coiling beneath armored scales, then pushed off from the ground with a force that sent dust spiraling in clouds. For a terrible moment, he faltered, wing dipping dangerously. Then the actuators flared, compensating, stabilizing. Varos rose. Not smoothly, not gracefully, but he rose, higher and higher until his massive form was silhouetted against Kesserik's burning sky. His roar of triumph shook the ground beneath Darren's feet, a sound that carried for miles across the wasteland. Watching him circle overhead, Darren felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. That hope was tested the very next day when the scavenger ships appeared on the horizon, 3 of them, black and angular, moving with the deliberate patience of predators who knew their prey was cornered. "Hunters," Darren muttered, scanning them through salvaged binoculars. "Looking for whatever crashed here. Looking for Varos." The dragon growled, sensing Darren's tension. His massive head swung toward the approaching ships, nostrils flaring. "They made you," Darren said quietly. "And now they want you back." He had cobbled together what defenses he could over the weeks, makeshift mines, a few jury-rigged pulse rifles, nothing that would hold off a professional recovery team for long. He could run, try to hide in the deeper wastelands, but these weren't the kind who gave up easily. Varos nudged him with surprising gentleness, then stepped forward, positioning himself between Darren and the approaching threat. His wings spread wide, the actuators glowing with blue fire against the red sky. "No," Darren said, understanding the dragon's intent immediately. "They'll kill you." Varos looked back at him, silver eye gleaming with something that transcended language, determination, defiance, choice. The first ship broke formation, sweeping low over the ridge. Darren caught the glint of weapon systems powering up. There would be no negotiation, no surrender. They had come to claim what they believed was theirs. "Damn it," Darren whispered, then nodded once. "Together, then." He climbed onto Varos's back, fingers finding purchase between armored scales. The heat didn't burn him, it never had. As if the dragon's fire recognized him. Varos crouched, muscles tensing, then launched skyward with a force that nearly threw Darren off. The actuators flared, compensating for the added weight, stabilizing the damaged wing as they rose higher and higher, until the scavenger ships were dots below them. Then Varos folded his wings and dived. The descent was like nothing Darren had ever experienced, faster than freefall, the wind screaming past his helmet, the ground rushing up to meet them. At the last possible moment, Varos pulled up, wings snapping open, and unleashed a stream of white-hot flame that engulfed the lead ship. The battle that followed was chaos, metal and fire against scale and fury. The scavenger ships were armed, dangerous, but they had been designed to hunt wounded prey, not face it head-on. And they certainly hadn't expected a human riding on the back of their target, directing their attacks with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime repairing and dismantling such vessels. One by one, the ships fell, crippled, burning, forced to retreat. When the last one disappeared beyond the horizon, Varos landed on a high ridge overlooking the wasteland, steam rising from his scales. Darren slid from his back, legs shaking from adrenaline. "They'll send more," he said. Varos rumbled in agreement, then turned his gaze upward. Through the swirling red haze of Kesserik's atmosphere, stars were becoming visible as night approached. Among them, distant but clear, the lights of passing ships, trade routes, transport lanes, life beyond this dying world. Darren followed the dragon's gaze. "Yeah. I've been thinking the same thing." He had spent weeks salvaging parts, not just to heal Varos, but to modify and strengthen him. The actuators weren't just for flying, they could handle the strain of high-altitude flight, possibly even brief periods in vacuum with the right shielding. "It's not going to be easy," Darren said, patting the dragon's flank. But nothing worth doing ever is. Varos lowered his head, nudging Darren gently before looking back at the stars. 3 days later, as Kesserik's fractured moon reached its zenith, casting the wasteland in bloody light, Darren climbed onto Varos's back one final time. The dragon's scales were adorned now with salvaged armor plating, oxygen reservoirs, and navigation equipment, a patchwork of technology and biology that shouldn't work, but somehow did. "Ready?" Darren asked, securing his helmet. Varos rumbled deep in his chest, wings spreading wide, actuators glowing with power scavenged from a dozen crash sites. Then they were airborne, climbing higher than ever before, leaving the burning sky of Kesserik behind them as they ascended toward the stars, not as predator and prey, not as weapon and target, but as something new. Something free. The end.